Last week, we spoke about how you can handle errors properly using exceptions, how a caller may handle an exception using the catch or specify requirements, and also the notion about a runtime call stack. This week, I would like to start by reinforcing your understanding about the idea about exceptions by doing some advanced case study. Namely, I want to develop test cases for an application where, under erroneous conditions, some exceptions might be thrown. Okay, let's now go over the learning outcomes, and then I will formally introduce to you the problem about a bounded counter. Okay, so upon finishing this module, I'm hoping that you will understand about testing the solution to a bounded counter problem. I will actually introduce the problem to you, but what we will do is we want to really see how we can test the solution. Developing the solution itself is definitely important, but to really verify and by testing its correctness will be equally important. And we want to see how manual console testers are actually limited, so we will start by using simply system.out.println on the console application, which is very straightforward to follow, and also I can explain some logic about the tester design, but we will have to conclude that it's still limited in its nature. We'll see. And we want to derive test cases for a bounded variable. So this course is not really about software testing, but I do want to give you some sense about how you can develop test cases when you have a very particular, very specific bounds for certain variables. So you can have some idea when you get to the more complicated application, how you can develop some additional test cases on your own, which is crucial for your developments. And also we're going to learn about how you can use JUnit test cases and why they are actually effective given their automated nature. And I'll conclude by talking about the so-called test-driven developments, or TDD, by regression testing. It is some practice I would really like you to really adopt when you actually do your laboratory exercises, or even when you actually do your programming tests, and also beyond this course. All right, let's now talk about some motivating example, which will be a bounded counter problem. Okay, let's now introduce two types of errors. And we learned about from the previous module that to handle errors, the most effective way, the more appropriate way, is actually by using exceptions rather than using console messages. Okay, let's now consider two kinds of exceptions for a counter, which is bounded by its lower bound and also upper bound. Let's say we got value too large exception. Okay, so you already learned about how to create an exception from Eclipse, so I'm gonna assume you know how to do that. Let's say we got one exception called value too large, okay, and the other one called value too small exception, right? It's quite kind of symmetric. And any thrown objects instantiated from these two classes must be handled, right? So it's any caller of a method that may throw either this or this exception will be faced with the catch or specify requirements, either to catch it or to specify it. I'll review that very quickly in just a little bit later, in just a moment. Okay, and we either have to specify or we have to handle. In order to specify it, you have to include the throws clause, as part of the header of the method. If you want to handle that, so that means you want to include a try and catch block inside the body of implementation of the caller. Right, so this is what you learned from the previous module. All right, so let's now review very quickly. Let me switch to the iPad about a specify or catch. Well, catch was specified. Doesn't matter how you call that. Let's say catch was specified. Principle or requirements. So approach number one. Let's say this. Let's say we have this class called C1, and then under which, let me use a different color here. Let's say we got C1 here, and then we got method M1. And method M1 actually inside its body of implementation, so this will be the erroneous condition, right? To say under which you actually have to handle the error. So this is how we handle the error over here. Okay, so this is how we handle the error. Handle an error. And also this is where the exception is originated. And as I said before, usually in the method where the exception is originated, you don't really take for the catch option, meaning that you're not going to say try and catch, and try this and then catch it. directly. It's actually not no use. You really want to propagate this exception for at least one level further so that the caller can actually handle that, right? That's what we said in the earlier lecture. Okay, so let me just emphasize that. Over here, you can see as part of the header of this originating method, so we actually took the specify option over here. So this is the specify option for handling the exception. Okay, so that's about some quick review about how you can throw the exception and how to specify that. Let's now talk about one level further. Let's talk about a caller of this particular method here. Okay, so we talk about C1M1. Let's talk about its caller. Let's talk about another class, maybe called as C2 over here. So C2 over there declares some attributes of type C1, and then inside the method M2 over here, we are actually calling C1.M1 over here. So this method call potentially may or may not throw the value too small exception, which was declared over here. You can see for C1 again, so this is the context objects of type C1 over here. And then the M1 over here, also very important. Let me just highlight it specifically. You can see M1, the method here, as part of its API, or as part of its header, it may throw value too small exception, right? Let me just note that. So this is really kind of the mental sketch you really want to have when you actually look at the code. So here for M1, the method call here may throw a value too small exception. Okay, and then, so that means more importantly, for this line over here, since we are calling a line that may throw this particular exception, that means it is subject to the catch or specify requirements. So at this level, we are free to either opt for catch or specify. Let's talk about approach number one. Approach number one, we simply opt for specify option, which means we are not going to handle this exception at this caller. We just want to push that further to propagate the exception further to the call stack, right? That's something we spoke about last time. So this will be simply just specify. Okay, again, this will be the specify option that we have. Okay, I just annotate it. So this would be just another level of specify. Of course, eventually, if you specify all the way to the main method, which will be the entry point of execution, in that case, if the exception really occurs, no caller on the call stack is going to handle that, and the exception will be thrown to the console. That's also something we did in the last module. I just want to remind you. Over here, that's also a specify option. Okay, so that's about approach number one. What about approach number two? Approach number two is more to take the responsibility right here for the current caller. Okay, let's now take a look. So what we have is, you can see we are making this particular method call C2.M2 over here. You can see C2, the context object over here, was declared of type C2, right? So in class C2, we actually got method M2. You can see in class C2 and also method M2, as part of its header, it says it may throw value too small exception, right? That's something we just did, right? You really should consider these two pages continuously. Okay, so this again may throw value too small exception. So that means must either catch or specify. Catch or specify. And the second approach, I just want to remind you about the catch option. So you can see try over here and catch. And notice that whenever you actually do a catch block, it's really crucial to make sure you catch the matching kind of exception. Especially, you can see this is value too small exception here. This should match, I should say, one of the exceptions that might come from the try block. From the catch block. In this case, it's simple. We only got one exception that might be thrown over here, which is M2. in this case, it might throw the value too small exception. So that's why we are having the matching kind over here. If you actually put another exception over here, you can try. Eclipse is going to complain from the compiler to say, from this particular block over here, let's say, for example, if you put value too large exception over here instead, that's the other kind of error that we assume. If you put value too, okay, let me put the exercise over here. You can try it out and then find out for yourself. So this will be the exercise I want you to do. Exercise. Put value too large exception instead. Of course, you gotta spell it out, right? I'm just putting the short form just to save time. Value too large exception over here, too large exception. If you put it value too large exception here, so that means the only exception that might occur from the try block is actually value too small exception. But you actually put a value too large exception in the catch block. In that case, it is not valid, because whatever that might come out over here, value too small, is still not really handled by one of the catch blocks that you actually specify over here. So that's why it's an important exercise I would like you to do. All right, just to convince yourself. Okay, so that's about the two approaches I want to remind you. Oh, one more thing, actually, before I forgot. If I got the try and catch block over here, that means this particular method call has been completely handled for its potentially thrown exception, value too small exception. So that means any caller of C3 and any caller of C3 main, in that case, they don't have to handle the exception anymore. All right, meaning that the exception will not be propagated any further. That's also an important point I want to remind you. So since the try and catch block is already specified here, so that means the value too small exception, which might be thrown from this particular method call, will not be propagated any further. Nothing is new so far. I think it's worth reviewing what we said in the last module, so you wouldn't get lost when I actually try to solve the bounded counter problem. All right, so that's about the review on the catch with specified principle or requirements. Let me go back to the slides, and that's exactly what I just reviewed about the two approaches. You can also read through the slides.